and welcome to another conversation in practical theology. My name is Saiyyidah Zaidi, and today we are here with Eric Stoddart and Harrie Cedar. We're going to be discussing new beginnings. It's a perfect time of the year and of the decade. We're probably going to be sharing a little bit about new beginnings that we've had, and also looking at kind of change and what I personally call pivots that have happened in the kind of people that we admire and respect from a practical theology perspective as well. And so to kick it off, I suppose I'll share a little bit about myself. And I personally find New Year's can be a little bit boring because everyone tries to go for a new start, or they try a new initiative, or something happens. But there's something very, very special about beginning a new decade. And that really provides an opportunity to take stock, not just on a personal level, but I think also on a spiritual level. And even just yesterday, I was realizing that every 10 years or so, there's some form of a change or something that happens to me personally. And I have to wonder whether that's just something that's happening because of a societal thing, or it's something that actually does happen in terms of kind of us just wanting to evolve and to kind of become better and more effective as human beings.
Yeah, well, wow, that's quite a place to start. Yeah, I'm absolutely with you on the idea that there's something about when the numbers on the calendar change, the digits change, there's a psychological thing that says, oh, here we go, we're into another decade, you know, when we used to have to write checks and remember to write the date on the check. Now it's all automated for us, all the dates that are generated, it maybe doesn't have quite the same pressure to remember, but I think just psychologically and emotionally there's something about seeing another set of digits appear at the end of the year. I don't know, Harrie, how do you feel about the digits in at least the calendar that we share? I know we've got individual calendars as well.
I don't feel so strongly about it, except that I'm joking with everyone that this is going to be another roaring 20s, but might be roaring for all the wrong reasons. I don't feel so much. I did at the millennium when we changed from 1999 to 2000, not because I thought anything spectacular was going to happen, but I just thought, wow, I'm alive at this moment, and that's sort of amazing. But it marked something. But at the same time, of course, I knew that it was just a fake calendar thing. So, I agree with Said. I don't particularly like the civil New Year. It brings back things of parties and stuff like that I don't want to be at. And so I duck out. I like January the 1st.
See, in Scotland, New Year is such a big thing. It's almost bigger than Christmas. That has changed a little bit. But the focus was always in Scotland when I was growing up. Yes, you did Christmas, but actually Hogmanay was such a big thing. And I remember getting kicked out of the house with my father about 5 minutes to midnight. I must have been about 10, 11 years old. And you just stand out in the freezing cold, usually rain on December the 31st, because the first people into the house had to be male and they had to be dark haired. So my father and I qualified on both, and you were supposed to bring a piece of coal in to start the new fire. So that's the sort of memory of being, you know, as a 10, 11-year-old, bundled out of the door at just before midnight for this superstitious restart of a new year, and then bundled off to bed just as quick so the adults could enjoy Hogmanay celebrations.
And I think today, you know, like New Year's is very much around fireworks, you know, and so I always feel really sorry for the young kids and for the animals that can't, you know, that just can't actually have any form of a rest as a result of all of the fireworks that are going off. And then I have to say there's also the climate aspects of all of this now as well. And, you know, fireworks are quite dangerous. So without wishing to be a party pooper, I think that we need events to celebrate, or kind of markers in life and things to acknowledge. I think as human beings, we kind of, I love the idea of just being able to put a full stop at the end of a sentence, let's say, and then move on to something else. But sometimes the celebration or the acknowledgement of that just could be a wee bit more kind of, I don't know, just more reflective of the people, I suppose. And you know, having lived in Scotland for so many years, I think Hogmanay is great. And I think it's funny that you said that it's almost bigger than Christmas. I think I would say it is bigger than Christmas because even in London there are kind of Hogmanay celebrations as well. You know, it's really big. I think this particular year, in my view, has been quite challenging because of all of the events that have been happening globally. And so, for example, even the discussion around whether they should have fireworks in Sydney because of what was happening in Australia, I think some of that has seeped into the celebrations, I think, globally. And then there's all the other stuff that's happening politically as well. So whilst there's a good opportunity to take stock, I think that I personally live in a world where I'm quite worried now about the future. There's a lot to anticipate and a lot to hope for, but there is a lot of fear as well.
I quite like the idea of the more superstitious version that Eric has, because it actually marks something ritualistic about hope and warmth for the future, rather than just a party, get drunk and can't remember it. Some fireworks display. So I know it's got a superstitious thing to it, but it is a bit more reflective about bringing warmth. And we've just had a load of festivals of light around that, the end of the year. Christmas has all the fairy lights and lights up on the trees and stuff. And in my tradition, we've also gone through a festival that happens to coincide at this time of year, and it happens to be about light. And other people have those as well. And that's a hopeful thing about bringing light into the darkness. And I kind of like that very much. I guess that's why I like a very quiet and contemplative New Year's Eve, and then refreshed and start the year again. Yes, and try to look for the hopefulness. I guess I don't celebrate it quite so much because we have 4 New Years. So by the time it gets to this one, I've done New Year. But I like the idea of bringing a slightly more spiritual, reflective time back in, rather than just yet another party.
One of the things we used to do in Scotland was first footing. So the house could be full of sometimes strangers in the early hours of New Year's morning, because people would actually go around from door to door in the neighbourhood, and because people were living locally and knowing each other, you would sort of take the people who were part of your party and you would go to your neighbours and you'd stop in for a drink and then move on to the next house. And you had no idea who was coming in and out of the house. And certainly on New Year's Day, you would go first footing, friends, family, and you would take whoever happened to be there with you. And so there was something about this extending the community aspect, and it was really about reaching out and having strangers in your home at New Year. Now, once the pubs started opening over Hogmanay night, and once the clubs were open, and once people were not living in the same sort of communities, I noticed really from about the early 1980s that dropped off significantly. And I'm not sure it happens outside smaller communities anymore, but that was such a significant part of my memory of Hogmanays. And it was, yeah, we had the superstitious stuff, but we had this community thing. And some things got lost, but it's changed. It's maybe not lost all told.
I suppose it's also to do with trying to find some common celebration when we live in a very pluralistic society. So, I mean, I do my New Year, it's usually in September, October, which is a very, very spiritual, you know, reckoning time. And so this one is very much the civil one. I've always done it. I'm part of the British Society, but the British Society has changed, of course, and it's a much more pluralistic. And so we don't share so many traditions. Even Christmas, I know my Greek Orthodox friends celebrated on the 6th of January. So there's all these different things going on, and people having different ways of doing things, which I find really interesting. But of course, that means that you're not all in doing one thing.
I think that's a really important point, actually, because I think we need celebrations, but we also need things that we can all do together. You know, and New Year's, you know, in many respects, is broadly an event where people will go out and, you know, celebrate in ways that I don't think I can, or I don't want to be involved in, let's put it that way, right? But how do we then create these markers that we can all come together with, you know? Because I think you're absolutely right in that, you know, communities have got their own celebrations. So for example, in Islam, you know, our New Year is constantly changing because of the lunar calendar, you know. So you can't say it's going to be the same date every year, which then means that that has implications on the broader community that we live in. Because even with Ramadan, everyone's like, oh my God, is it now? Why is it changing? There's just no kind of cohesion, I suppose, in terms of how we can come together for that. But there are ways that communities do, and I think that's great. But New Year's, I suppose, is quite neutral in some ways. You know, it's not a religious activity or celebration, and it is something that we could probably use to all come together, because everyone that I know of certainly believes in some form of change. And it's funny because a few days, I think actually it was probably on New Year's Day, I said to my son, okay, New Year, what are your targets or what are your goals for the year? And even as a 13-year-old boy, he was able to come up with some really, really good kind of targets to set for the year. And if somebody can do that in 5 minutes, it gives them hope. So for me, this whole concept of turning a new page is about hope. And if we can all do that together, I think that is something that's very positive, because whilst we may invite other groups within or into our celebrations, it's never going to be the same.
Yeah, I agree with you. I think that's the bit I like about New Year's Eve. And it's also, people always joke about resolutions, but I think it makes you think about the future and make a list of what you want. That's great. All of that's great. I've done a lot of, at my age, I've done a lot of celebrations by now of New Year's, and I sort of have ducked out and I don't have to do it. But I agree that it is something that's neutral and can be celebrated together. It's a calendar event rather than anything else. So.
And it has, I think, so many different dimensions to it of the things we do together, even down to the level of the movies that are pretty standard for the main channels on New Year's Day or New Year's Eve. And it's either The Sound of Music or the latest blockbuster, some repeat of Independence Day or goodness knows what it is. And that is one little way, I think, of maybe people coming together, the sort of things that we watch together when we're now so variegated across different TV channels. It's not just the 4 that it used to be. The New Year's Day concerts, you know, there's something wonderful about the Vienna one, or if they're doing something in the Usher Hall in Edinburgh, or if it's more sort of Scottish that is broadcast around the country, whatever it is, there's sort of film, there's music, there's now the carnivals that are set up in so many cities. I've got mixed views on that, but I think there is something about that turning the page.
Is it also walking? You know, I see so many people going for early morning walks on New Year's. And so there are so many activities that we can come together. And this is actually, my mind is spinning with lots of things that we could potentially do as New Year's activities to kind of get people to come together that would otherwise never meet. I think this is an incredible conversation for that.
Yeah, there's a bit of a tradition now about the organised runs on New Year's Day, 5 kilometres, 10 kilometres, all that sort of thing that for those that like to move quickly. And so there's that's another element where the sort of civic world is getting itself self-organised.
Yes, we used to be by the seaside, and so we had people doing swims on New Year's Day. There was a Boxing Day swim and a New Year's Day swim, and there were charity events. So it was a really good moment, actually, I have to say, to see people doing something, having fun, being incredibly brave because it's freezing, and also raising money for charity at the same time. So there are those sorts of events that make you feel some sort of community activity going on. People want a sense of belonging to something and some meaning in their life.
Absolutely.
I think it's so interesting that there's a move, even unconsciously, to ritualize that community coming together, whether it is the same movie or the concert or the charity swim or the run. It's telling us, I think, something about that inherent human desire to ritualize and to mark things, and where our religious traditions maybe have a little bit more of a back seat, maybe rightly so, in initiating those. It's still part of what it means to be human, to want to ritualize the turning of a new year.
I mean, I agree with you, but I also think there is something to be said about just making a decision. You know? And you know, in my work, one of the things that I really advocate is that if you want a change, you don't need to wait for a particular date or a marker. You just need to make a decision. And so, of course, you know, there is a lot of skepticism about New Year's resolutions, but it is a good time to make a change or a mark or identify something that you don't want to do. But if you've missed that opportunity, you can also do it any time. And I think the challenge that I see so many people facing is that lack of belief that they can make the decision to do something differently, or just putting it off and saying, it's okay, I'll do it tomorrow. But as we know, there may not be a tomorrow, you know. And I think that if there is something that somebody really wants to do, I would just encourage you to make that decision, because that decision in itself is that marker.
I agree. I think there are sort of start dates to things. And a lot of times people feel, if I didn't start it on the 1st or 2nd of January or whatever, or on the Monday of this week, or then the whole week's blown or whatever. And I just had this sort of epiphany moment where I realized I'm just a work in progress, with the emphasis on work. Some days are good at work and some days are bad at work, but I shouldn't throw the whole job because I had a bad day. So I can restart it another day. And that's a nice thing, that every day is the fresh one.
Absolutely.
Yeah, I'm going to make a confession here about an epiphany. I actually, for the first time ever, sat down to try and watch the whole of Sound of Music. And I know the peak moments in the movie, and I know the songs. And as I was watching it, I had never clocked that it's the Mother Superior who sings the song, "Climb Every Mountain, ford every stream, follow every rainbow, till you find your dream." It just hadn't passed me by completely. I'd always assumed it was Julie Andrews who was singing it. And that was suddenly a moment that I thought, actually, here's, for me, something of she's a figure of spirituality, she's a figure about God, and she's saying, climb every mountain. This is not about waiting necessarily for God to do something. This is about ford every stream, follow every rainbow. And that, I became in that moment a fan of that little bit of Sound of Music. And just having noticed the connection with spirituality that I'd never seen before in that particular song.
Having never really liked the Sound of Music, you've convinced me of that little bit, because I've always, even since a kid, I thought, but that, now I am convinced. Lovely.
And it's about that, as you were saying, we can make a change anytime. We can start something at any point. We don't actually need a specific occasion. And maybe sometimes spirituality gets in the way. We over-spiritualize something when actually we can just do it.
Yeah, I mean, it's fun. I don't know if change is a spiritual thing, and I'm going to contradict myself in a moment, I know, because I think that if we put too much of an aspect in terms of reliance upon God or some form of intervention that we're waiting for, then we're kind of removing our own agency. And so there is something, God has given us the ability to make decisions, so we should be doing that. At the same time, I do think that sometimes we try and do things and God puts obstacles in our way to teach us lessons, as I'm now discovering to my pain with my doctorate and have been for many years, it seems. But there are lessons to be learned, right? It's just that you have to make that decision to begin. And I think in some ways, the starting is a spiritual thing, but making the decision might not be, even though there is a layer of kind of divine intervention attached to that. Does that make sense?
I think probably we would say it differently, because we think that action is the result of a creative moment. And so the action that you do in the world comes from creative, and the speech is an action, and the action is an action, and they all come from the same source. And they emanate from this creative source of God and of humans, and they're called asiya, the actual action in the world.
Yeah. I mean, I think that I think principally Muslims and Islam would say exactly the same thing. I think what I see in the world today is too many people are waiting for that divine intervention and waiting for that download from God, and so they're kind of forgetting that they are also part of it. Does that make sense?
Yes, it's probably a misreading of the original ideas of Adam and Eve. They're put there to tend the garden or to keep it or whatever. They're not there just to sit on their bottoms and be fed like children all their lives. They have to get up and put their own food on their own table. That is a holy action to do that.
Absolutely.
So, yeah.
And maybe that's comes back to this new year, new beginnings thing, because to get reminded that we are able to act, that we can make a difference, especially when we, Saiyyidah, you were reflecting on the state of the world. It sometimes, to me, feels like there's almost nothing that I can do. Does it even matter if I do something? Because everything else is just so big and trundling on at such great speed. And maybe that idea of new beginnings, new possibilities, tied up with agency and how we understand what God does for us, in us, through us, because of us, despite us, all those complicated ways. To me, it's a little bit of a reminder that new beginnings, new possibilities.
Yeah, I mean, it's interesting because you're reminding me of a prophetic tradition that says that if you have a seed in your hand and the end of time is coming, you still plant the seed. Yeah. So we always have hope.
Yes, I mean, we have the same thing, and we're coming up for in beginning of February, one of our 4 New Years for trees, where we plant trees. Whatever is going to happen, we're still going to plant the trees, and particularly the fruit trees. And you're not allowed to cut down fruit trees in any circumstances, because you don't own them in the long term. So yeah, it's the same sort of hope for the future. It's to do with tithes and bringing fruits to the temple and stuff like that. You've got to wait 3 years before you're allowed to eat the fruit, so you need a date to set it by. But it's also so it's a ritual thing, and it's an agricultural thing, and it ties up a little bit a whole load of things. But it's also about the future and planting hope for the future.
Yeah, and planting for the next generation and the generation after that, and not just doing something for our own generation that we're going to see. And that there's something beautiful for me about that, the idea that we're doing something, we're not going to see the fulfillment of that. We're not going to necessarily see that tree grow to its full potential. That's going to be for 1 or 2 or even 3 generations further down the road. But we've got to plant the tree.
And I think that also comes to ideas that we have. You know, so we probably have a million different kind of thoughts and ideas for projects and activities and things like that that we could do, but very few of those will ever turn into something that is a reality. And so I suppose we need to, I'm kind of speaking to myself here, I need to be more selective about the seeds that I pick to plant. Because if you think about it in terms of the next 10 years, that's one thing. But if I think about it 7 generations down the line, that's very, very different concept. And I think that's much more powerful, right?
We have a tradition or a saying, you're not obliged to finish the work, but you are obliged to start it.
I love that. Very powerful.
That sounds so releasing from the pressure of a world where we're supposed to achieve and we're supposed to demonstrate what it is that we're contributing to the world. That's a fantastic release from that.
Yes, yeah. It's very much about everybody's got a purpose and everyone's got a place and everyone's got something they have to contribute, but they won't necessarily achieve all their aims in life. That's not it. Just be part of it. And
I think that the kind of interesting thing for me about aims in life and things is that actually it's constantly changing.
Yeah.
You know? And so in order to be kind to ourselves, we need to remember that as adults, because when you're younger, and I'm seeing this with my own kids who are teenagers and they're now trying to do some career planning things, they're kind of being pushed in a particular funnel. And I'm saying, actually, you don't have to worry. It doesn't even matter what degree you do, because I'm not using my degree, my initial degree right now. You know, life is constantly on the move. And I think when you're open to that change, and then the richness does come. You know, but society will restrict us, and it still does now, even though, you know, the jobs that kids are going to be doing today haven't been invented. Society still wants to kind of pigeonhole and say, if you pick this, then you've got to go down that particular path. And I think as a result of that, we do that to ourselves as well.
Yes, I think when I said I'm a work in progress, I don't know if progress is a sort of upward thing or just a flat line, but I'm a continual work would be maybe the better thing. And yes, sometimes it works and sometimes it doesn't, and good days, bad days, but you don't give up on the project. You have to keep going. That's the thing.
I'm with you entirely.
Good luck with the PhD.
Yeah. Let's not talk about that now. So one thing that might be quite nice for us to share with our listeners and viewers before we wrap up is any particular things that we might be looking forward to in the next year or in the next decade.
That's a big one. I want to go and see one of these new style non-firework firework displays. Singapore, I think it was, had hundreds of drones up there programmed and doing what we would see as a fireworks display, but with drones emitting light and going into all sorts of shapes and creating 3D. you couldn't get any sense of real how wonderful that was by just seeing the little clips on the news. So if that's going to be possible in the next 10 years, I want to see that. I want to see the rehabilitation of drones for a good use, and that's part of my other stuff on surveillance. But I think that will be like seeing fireworks again for the first time.
That sounds amazing.
I think I want to see the growth of the green industry. I think that there's a huge capacity there, and I think people are starting to plug in. The next generation and the generation after are starting to move in that way. I want to see solar power, basically. I want to see solar batteries about that big and solar panels about that big, so that they're really portable and you don't need the entire roof to heat up a kettle of water. But that's what I want to see in the future. I want to see green energy. I know there's going to be a whole load of horrible things happening along the way. We're already starting the year with some not great stuff, but I'm always hopeful that the next generation will be better and more equipped and will, ignore all our stupidity and take off over us and make the world better. I think that the environmental issues have finally come to the fore, and the pollution issues and stuff like that. And I'm looking forward to that. I won't be part of it, but I'm cheering it on.
Yeah, absolutely. I think that's excellent as well. And I think maybe God is reminding us through what is happening in Australia that it is so pertinent that we need to really focus in on climate change issues, because the images that we've seen from space of what Australia looks like at the moment actually are really horrific. And I think, on a personal level, the things that I'm seeing that are happening to human beings are really, really tragic. But when I see what's happening to the nature and to the animals, that's all just as devastating. And I can't find the words to describe what I'm feeling. I'm really, really struggling with that one. My kind of things that I'm looking forward to is some more work, I think, on mental health, but at a governmental level, and not just about kind of policies and lovely documents that get printed, but something that's really, really tangible and has a kind of impact through all of the layers of society. I'd also like to see an end to food banks and to homelessness, because I think if things like that can happen, then whilst some people may say that we will regress, actually, I think it will be an end to problems, because I think charitable organisations should not be picking up the pieces for things that are actually really big societal issues. And I think more respect generally is something that I would like to see on a human-to-human level, but also on a kind of global level as well. And I hope that there's some traveling in there for me as well, and some kind of exciting adventures. And that's about, and please God, everyone pray for me to finish my doctorate. And that's about it. I think that's big asks in some respects, but yeah. So I think we'll wrap up with that. Thank you so much to Eric and to Harrie for joining and participating in this discussion. We'd love to hear what your views are. If you've got any comments on new beginnings from your own traditions, if they are similar or different, please do share them below, and hopefully we will see you in another conversation in practical theology very, very soon. Thank you and goodbye.